Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So we've all been there. And we have all had moments where stress seems to just take over and we just react in ways that we regret later. And you might be thinking of a situation right now, and it might be that you raised your voice at a teacher or at a student or a board member in a meeting. It might be that you or I overreacted during a conversation/argument with someone that we care about. And then later we usually have regrets and we're like, why did I do that? Well, the answer is very often due to something called amygdala hijack. And that's a term coined by psychologist Daniel Goleman in his excellent book, Emotional Intelligence. And so we have stressful jobs as private school leaders. The stakes are high. And we can't afford to let our amygdalas hijack our brains and then just hope for the best and hope we can apologize later. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to talk about how to avoid amygdala hijack in high stress situations. And before we jump into that, I just want to tell you about a new and free resource that I've created for you. I'm pretty excited about it. It's called the 7 Secrets to Improving Teacher Morale. And I talk to a lot of leaders. I coach a lot of leaders, and teacher morale is a big challenge at a lot of our schools. And I think you need a plan. And this is a plan for you, a step-by-step guide that you can grab it. It's free at theprivateschoolleader.com/morale. It's called the 7 Secrets to Improving Teacher Morale. It's a starting point. It's going to be hard work, but it will work. And I hope that you will get that, and I hope that you will use it. And again, just a free gift saying thank you for listening to the podcast. 7 Secrets to Improving Teacher Morale over at theprivateschoolleader.com/morale. And then, I just want to remind you that I can help you solve a problem. And it might be through Thrive Academy, the online course that you can find over at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. And that course can change the way that you lead. It can help you go from being in survival mode to thriving, and to do that asynchronous work at a time that works for you. But also we have office hours where we have other leaders from all over North America showing up, supporting each other, rooting each other on. And so theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive is where you can find out more about that. And I can also help you solve your biggest problem at the school, or at least I can try to help you. I want to hear more about it. I have one coaching spot open, and that will probably be gone soon, but I'd love for it to be you. So you can check out more information about working with me one-on-one over at theprivateschoolleader.com/coaching. So let's talk amygdala hijack. And then I want to give you the 4 steps to avoiding amygdala hijack in high stress situations. Let me hit you with those 4, and then we'll define it, and then we'll break down each one. So number 1 is pause. Number 2 is embrace the space. Number 3 is respond, don't react. And number 4 is regulate your autonomic nervous system. So we're going to pause, embrace, respond, and regulate. So what is amygdala hijack? I know that a lot of you know what this is, but I think it's super important to pause and view this through the lens of what you deal with every single day as a private school leader. And you know that the amygdala is part of your brain that's responsible for processing emotions, but especially those emotions that are related to fear and threats and survival. And let's face it, our brains are really, really good at automatically trying to protect us from danger. I remember one time I was on a senior retreat, and a couple other teachers with me. One of them was one of our gym teachers, and she's up there, and we're on this high ropes course. And moving through the high ropes course, and she went to take a step, and her brain sent a message to her legs, and her legs turned into stone. Her legs couldn't have moved no matter what she did, because the brain was saying, there's no way you're stepping out on that telephone pole that's 40 feet in the air. Our brains protect us from danger. And so the amygdala is your brain's alarm system. And if you're faced with a threat or a perceived threat, then we know the amygdala takes over and it throws you right into fight or flight. And sometimes people call it fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes we freeze. But your brain and your body is flooded with cortisol. And there's some good things about fight or flight, because, your heart rate goes up and it pushes blood to the extremities, and your vision actually narrows, and your body becomes this hyper optimized vehicle for fleeing danger. But the problem is that we're not being chased by a bear when we're at our school. And we just keep running, and the cortisol just keeps flowing, and we can't get away from the bear. And so your brain gets hijacked by the amygdala that is sensing danger, but is looking around your office and doesn't really see the bear, doesn't see the lion. And, this is something that, happens a lot, where we, get our amygdala hijacked, and, that works great if you're out in the woods and an animal's chasing you, but it's not so great when you're at work, in a boardroom meeting, in a meeting in our office with a parent, or having a conflict at home with your partner or spouse. And in amygdala hijack, your rational brain, the prefrontal cortex, completely bypassed. We're acting on emotion and not reason when our brains are hijacked by the amygdala. And then we are impulsive, and we yell, or we say things that we don't mean, or we make decisions that are not in the best interest of ourselves or our school. And hopefully it doesn't happen very often, but I'll tell you what, I'm worried that it's happening more and more often to more and more private school leaders, because we're under more and more stress, more and more demands. When you do the impossible, it becomes part of your job description. And I just wonder where all that cortisol is supposed to go. And so the good news is that if you follow these 4 steps, you can reduce the amount and the intensity of amygdala hijack. So let's get into it. Step 1 is pause. So this sounds simple, but in the heat of the moment, pausing is so hard to do, because we want to just react. But pausing gives your brain a chance to catch up and maybe switch gears. And then when you feel that stress rising, and it could be like a wave, sometimes it feels like a wave of anger. There's a lot to be angry about. It might be righteous indignation. It could be a wave of anxiety. There's a lot of things to worry about in our schools, but we need to take a moment to pause before you say anything or before you do anything. And I realize that's so easy to say and so hard to do, but the pause is so important. And so the reason that the pause is so important is because when we pause, we can actually stop the amygdala from completely hijacking the way that we respond to a situation. And that pause can help us shift from an emotional reaction to a more measured, rational, thoughtful response. I was born in the late 60s. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and I think that people my age, or maybe even a little younger than me, just your mom or your dad always just, said, count to 10, count to 10. I have a twin sister, and we were always fighting about something, and, count to 10. Well, what was mom or dad, my mom or dad, your parent, guardian, your mom or dad, what were they trying to get you to do? They were trying to get you to pause. And so what it does is that it creates a little bit of space, and we're going to talk about that space in just a moment, but it creates a space between the trigger and your next move, between stimulus and response. And again, that's what we're going to talk about in step 2. So just one last thing. I mentioned when I was born, I know all about VCRs. I know all about the pause button. I know what Be Kind Rewind means. But, even on Netflix, on Amazon, whatever you're watching, there's a pause button. And, it might be there's a knock at the door, or the dogs are barking, or the kids need something, or whatever. You're watching a movie and you just pause it, right? Everyone knows what pause is on the movie. But why don't we ever try to reach for that pause button in life? Well, I think it's because when we're typically sitting on a couch in our comfortable clothes watching a movie, we're not, having our body completely flooded with cortisol that makes our judgment poor. But again, if you can think about just the pause button when you're hit with something that's super stressful, just pause. And just a quick example or two of that is a teacher comes at you and they're all fired up and they present you a problem and they want an answer and they want it now. That could be a parent or a teacher. And again, to pause, and instead of just reacting and giving an answer right then, or making a promise, or saying something that you'll later regret, how about we say, you know what, I need to think about that and I'll get back to you with an answer by the end of the day. Sometimes that's hard, isn't it? Because we're known for solving problems. We're known for our efficiency. We're known for being quick with our solving of problems. We talked about that on last week's episode. But I feel strongly, and I know you do too, it's just a matter of whether we can actually do it, is that we should never respond and make that promise when we're upset. And I hope that you all agree with this next statement, and that is never immediately respond to an email or a text when you are upset. When you're in that moment, when you're just angry, you're upset, there are so many things that can trigger us in our jobs. There are so many times that a teacher can be frustrating. It's like, I told you 7 times, and now you're still doing the thing, or the student, or especially the parent. And it's like, seriously? I did this, I did that, I did 17 things for this parent, and now they're still ungrateful, unhappy, and complaining about this thing now. It's so easy to fire off that response, and we almost always regret it. So we need to pause. All right. Step number 2 is embrace the space. There's a famous quote by Viktor Frankl. It's one of my favorite quotes. He's a Holocaust survivor and a psychiatrist. He's the author of the book Man's Search for Meaning. He was a prisoner at the terrible Auschwitz concentration camp. And Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, I want you to think about a man that's in a concentration camp, and the Nazis are controlling everything in his life. They killed his family. They were starving him. They were putting him through extreme conditions as far as temperature and frostbite and hard labor. And the way that he survived the Holocaust, he sums up by saying, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The ability to choose equals freedom. And so what we're striving for here today with this amygdala hijack is a little bit of choice, a little bit of control in the midst of that emotional wave after wave that is trying to control our behavior. And so we want to embrace the space. So we talked about pausing, and now we're embracing the space. And, that space that Viktor Frankl refers to is just what allows us to act with intention rather than a reflex. We can act with intention instead of with a reflex. And so once you've paused, you can now embrace the space and reflect, even if it's just for a second. What is actually happening here? How am I feeling? What is the best way to respond? And I know that space might be a second. It might be a second and a half. But if we can pause and we can embrace that space and we can embrace the power that is in that space, it's our power to choose our response. That's what Viktor Frankl said. In that space is our power to choose our response. I think that amygdala hijack usually takes our power away. We got to get that power back. How do we get the power to choose? It's the pause, and then it's embracing the space. And in that space, you're not a victim of your emotions. Your emotions are not in control. They're no longer driving the bus. You want your emotions to be a passenger on the bus, but you want to be the one with the steering wheel in your hands, in your control. And that cortisol that's flooding your body, it takes away our clarity. And we need clarity before we respond in our jobs as private school leaders, don't we? We need clarity. Just remember that ability to choose equals freedom. And so, again, a quick example is a parent says something that offends you. I've had that happen. You've had that happen. And instead of reacting instantly, we just take that pause and we embrace that space. And in the span of a few seconds, we just say to ourselves, is this really worth getting upset over? Consider the source, because that parent's going to say something to offend you 2 weeks from now, right? What outcome do I want from this interaction? What is best for this person's child? That's the big one that works for me is that when I want to react, when I want to say something, I think about that person's kid. That kid didn't choose their parents. And sometimes, we've got some really tough parents, right? That 5%. I'll try to I'll link that episode, the 5% of parents that are trying to destroy your school. I'll link that in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 106. The 5%ers, they're really tough when it comes to amygdala hijack. What works for me is I think about their kid. They didn't choose the parent. They didn't choose a parent that acts that way. Sometimes the school is the best thing that ever happened to that kid. And so sometimes thinking about what's best for the child will help us to embrace the space. Okay. Step 3 on our list of 4 strategies to 4 steps to not give in to amygdala hijack. Step 3 is respond, don't react. So once we've paused and embraced the space, now it's time to choose our response. So I want you to think about the word react. So again, this step 3 is respond, don't react. But let's think about the word react for a moment. A reaction, some of the synonyms, it's automatic, it's a reflex, it implies emotional. When you're at the doctor for your annual physical, I don't know about you, but he still does the little hammer on my knee and my knee goes flying up in there. A reflex. We're not in control of that. It just happens. But when something is automatic, when we react, how often do we regret it later? When we respond, how often do we regret it later? I'm going to tell you, in my life, when I react, regrets, a lot of them. When I respond, regrets, very few. So we're thinking about the difference between responding and reacting. And so that word respond implies that it's thoughtful and intentional. It's something that we're thinking about, that we're working through. Respond, don't react. And when you respond, you've taken the time to assess the situation and maybe even consider some options. And again, viewing this through the lens of a private school leader, we have so many things coming at us, so many different directions, high stakes, stressful job, a lot of balls in the air, a lot of things on our plate, however you want to describe it. And then these things come at us. We're already stressed out. Do we respond or do we react? I don't know about you, but I react. But I'm trying to respond more often. And then, when we respond, we're not at the mercy of our amygdala. And I want the one thing, and I put this in caps in my notes. I just want everyone to get this. We cannot respond to emotion with emotion. Okay? I'm going to say that again. Think about this, especially as it relates to meeting with parents, sometimes meeting with teachers. We cannot respond to emotion with emotion. Now, I know that you try to respond to an emotional parent with logic and reason, they don't always want to hear it. But if we match their emotion, it's not going to be a good conversation. We can't respond to emotion with emotion. So by responding instead of reacting, we can try to have a little bit of control over the situation and a little bit of control over our emotions. And then that brings us to step 4, which is to regulate your autonomic nervous system. So when we're in a high stress situation, I've already talked about how amygdala hijack, it's really your autonomic nervous system kicking into high gear, triggering that fight or flight response. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing becomes more shallow, stress hormone cortisol flows through your body, the blood flows to your extremities so that you can run faster. But if we're regulating our autonomic nervous system, we're basically telling our brain, I'm not in danger, so we can relax. And you're like, yeah, I can't really trick my brain when it's doing something automatic. But I want to talk to you about a couple of things that can really help. So when we're trying to do a couple of techniques to just say, I'm going to talk about name it to tame it in a minute, but when we're trying to get out of that amygdala hijack, what we're trying to do is to tell our brain that we're safe. The brain thinks we're not safe. We got to get out of there. Okay, we got to get out of the amygdala and get into that prefrontal cortex. So how are some ways to do that? Okay, first of all, deep breathing. Take a few slow, deep breaths. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, especially if it's pursed lips. One of the things that has helped me in the past is a thing called the physiological sigh. I'll link a YouTube video. It's like, a minute or 2 minutes long. Physiological sigh is a big, deep breath and then another quick little breath at the top, and just to really fill up those lungs. Another thing that helps, another technique to regulate your autonomic nervous system, are called grounding techniques. And that's when you focus on your senses, like what you can see or hear or feel your feet, your butt on the chair, your hands on your thighs. It just kind of brings your attention back to this present moment, and it can kind of help to reduce those feelings of overwhelm and other things that are caused by the amygdala hijack. And what I like to do, what's really worked for me, is to combine breathing and grounding. And I do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I've talked about it before, but I'll give it to you real quick. I do this. It takes less than 2 minutes. If I'm really stressed out at school. So you start with your eyes open, sitting comfortably, and you take a deep breath in, and then something you see. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear after you close your eyes, 3 things you feel, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. Okay, so I'll just walk you through it quickly. So big deep breath in, I see that clock, out. Big deep breath in, I see the doorknob. Breath out. Big deep breath in, I see my computer screen. Okay, so then you close your eyes, and 4 things. Big deep breath in, I hear the air conditioner, and then 3 things you feel. I feel my butt on the chair. I feel my feet on the floor. I feel the little pain in my knee from working out this morning. 2 things you smell and 1 thing you taste. When you do that, big breath in, big breath out, you're grounding yourself. You're doing deep breathing. I don't know about you. It might be worth a try. It really works for me, is combining those 2. And then 2 more strategies real quick for regulating your autonomic nervous system. Engage the prefrontal cortex. And that would be some people, I know a couple of people that this works really well for them, is math. They just start doing multiplication tables or 2-digit or 3-digit addition in their head, okay, mental math. Because then you're going to move all of that action in your brain from the amygdala and throw it up to the prefrontal cortex, and that's where you want it to be. And the way to get there is some mental math. What's 11 times 4? What's 6 times 7? What's 4 times 6? Those are the things that can just immediately get you out of that. It's worth a try. And then the last one is name it to tame it. And for me, this works really well. If I'm sitting in my office and it's 3:00 and I'm like really, really anxious and stressed out and there's like nothing going on, I'll stop and I'll ask myself, okay, why am I anxious right now? And then I'll think about it and I'll look at my calendar and then I'll be like, okay, I got this phone call I have to make at 4 p.m. and that parent's kind of been tough in the past. And so that's why I'm stressed out. And then I just feel better because I feel like sometimes that the amygdala, the fight or flight response, is just looking for that bear and it doesn't see it. And so we just keep running and we keep running and we keep running. And so sometimes you have to name it to tame it. And once your brain knows why you're anxious, at least for me, and this has worked for other people too that I've coached and people that I've talked to, is that sometimes that just releases it. And, really regulating your autonomic nervous system, we've talked about it. It's about, letting your amygdala know I'm safe. And then those responses start to fade away. So our big takeaways from today's episode, we talked about amygdala hijack and how it is that fight or flight response and all of the things that it does in your body. But then we talked about the 4 steps to avoiding amygdala hijack. Number 1, pause. Step number 2, embrace the space. There's a space between stimulus and response. Step number 3, respond, don't react. And step number 4, regulate your autonomic nervous system. And your call to action for today's episode is the next time your amygdala hijacks your brain, pause and take 3 deep breaths. Just see what happens. I think that we just have to have a strategy that when our amygdala hijacks our brain, that we're going to do the thing. So I don't care what the thing is, but if you have a thing that's your go-to thing and it works for you, then do the thing when the amygdala hijacks your brain, because there are a lot of private school leaders out there and their amygdala is hijacking their brain several times a day and they don't have a strategy to get out of that. And so that's the purpose of today's episode, is to help you get out of that. And so, as I said at the top of the episode, I have a new resource for you called The 7 Secrets to Improving Teacher Morale. I'd love for you to grab that. It's a free gift for you. You follow these secrets, implement them at your school. It will be hard work, but I really believe strongly that you can improve teacher morale at your school. And you can grab that free guide over at theprivateschoolleader.com/morale. And just another quick reminder about my online course that can teach you how to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. Everything that I've learned over 33 years of going from being in survival mode to thriving, it's all there in Thrive Academy for you. Also, the office hours, also 9 hours of video content with 7 modules and 39 lessons, 84-page workbook that you download and print the PDF, and you just go step by step, strategy by strategy. You might go through it in 6 days or 6 weeks, or it might take you a year. It's asynchronous. We've got the office hours. It's there for you to use the way that it works for your schedule, but it can make a huge difference for you, and you can learn more about it over at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. And I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email at mark.o.minkus@gmail.com if you've gotten help from any episode of this podcast and let me know a strategy that you're using at school, or maybe email me with your biggest pain point right now. And I mentioned the show notes are at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 106. I'd really appreciate it if you would rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it. And also if you would share the link with another leader in your life or a rising leader at your school. Check me out on Instagram at The Private School Leader, on Twitter at The PS Leader. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I just want to say I appreciate you so much, all the amazing hard work that you're doing for those lucky kids and those lucky teachers at your school. And I just appreciate you, and I appreciate you also taking some precious time out of your week to join me here today on the Private School Leader podcast. And I'll see you next time. And until then, always remember, serve first, lead second, and make a difference.